We tend to place the most limitations on ourselves, especially as an entrepreneur. You find yourself, it can be really difficult, it can be challenging, and it's not always the clearest path. But I think once you realize that you are the only one placing those limitations on yourself and preventing yourself from moving forward, then it opens this clear path for you. You can kind of understand, like, it's all a learning curve. There are no necessarily right or wrong ways to learn things.
Hello and welcome to Curious Ones podcast by Yandara. I'm Yael Ginzburg, the host of the podcast, a yoga and meditation teacher and philosophy lover. Each week you will hear eye-opening interviews with the different teachers of the Yandara Yoga Institute, located in beautiful Baja, Mexico, along with other teachers that pass through here. This life-changing knowledge, shared through authentic, heartfelt communication, will help you live a happier, more fulfilled, and connected life. Let's dive in. I'm so excited to have our guest today, Bella Silberfein.
Yep.
She is the event coordinator and co-founder of Luna Soul Retreats, which is the post-COVID evolution of Bhakti Fest. Bhakti Fest, which was founded by her father, Sridar Silberfein, is a yoga and meditation and sacred music event that took place in Joshua Tree for 11 years, hosting incredibly inspiring artists and teachers like Krishna Das, Ram Das, Shiva Ray, and Deepak Chopra. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here, and it's been a pleasure being around the festival that's been going on here at Yandara for the last few days, seeing the different teachers and the program and seeing the guests having so much fun and really enjoying being together and being in nature.
Yeah, it's really been so wonderful being here. People just love the space so much. It really opens the door for people to just completely let go of the outside world. We're so disconnected out here. So it's so beautiful. It's just the perfect location for this kind of event.
Yeah. I would like to start by hearing a little bit about your background and upbringing, because you really had a special and unique childhood growing up around these festivals and in Joshua Tree, which is such a magical place, and being around spirituality, a spiritual community, and kirtan. I think it's very special. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a huge part in my upbringing, being around all of these things. I was quite young when Bhakti Fest started in 2008. So I kind of grew up in that environment, as well as both my mother and father are both very spiritual people. They both share the same guru, Amaji. So I grew up every year going to see her once or twice a year when she would come to California, and being around that kind of spiritual energy. And when Bhakti Fest started, I just remember running around at Bhakti Fest, when normal kids are maybe out at the park, or I'm running around this spiritual festival listening to kirtan and sneaking into yoga classes. So it definitely had a big part of my upbringing. Absolutely.
You grew up in Joshua Tree, right? You moved there when?
I moved there in 2005, I believe, 2005, 2006.
And did you understand what's going on during the festival? How did this world of kirtan and sacred singing or chanting really open up to you?
Yeah, I would say it was kind of an interesting transition when I was younger, because when you're a young child, it can, especially a child in an area where this was not the normal. I would say my friends growing up didn't obviously have that a part of their life. So I think when I was very young, I almost had a bit of a resistance to it. It almost was like, oh, this is not normal. I felt like maybe it made me weird that it was part of my upbringing. And I remember kind of being afraid of what people might think about it. until probably my early teen years is when I started to embrace it in my own life and start to realize that it didn't necessarily have to have, because I grew up watching people use spirituality in somewhat strict terms of being like, this is how we connect to our spirituality and our inner conscious. And it took me a while until I was able to realize that it didn't necessarily have to follow those guidelines, but that I could still embrace spirituality. And then at that point, being around it for so many years, I started to realize how much it had impacted who I was as a person and how I viewed other people and how I treated people, and kind of why it had such a big impact on my life.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember a moment that caused the change, maybe a conversation or something you experienced?
I don't know if it was necessarily one moment, because I've remembered over the course of my life really having this gradual transition, and being around. I think it really helped being around when as I got a little bit older and I started working more in the festival. I started meeting a lot more young people that were in similar age brackets as me, that were coming specifically because, just to enjoy themselves, or because they had found that spiritual path for themselves. And as I became friends with those kind of people, I started to see different perspectives on things, and a little bit of like, okay, this is maybe not as abnormal as I thought, just because, especially growing with Joshua Tree, it's a very small town. So you kind of get that small town, that affects your mind a little bit, and what you think is normal, and, how other people live. So I think that gave me a lot more perspective at that point. And that's when I really started to see that change. Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting how when we're younger, it's so important for us to fit in. It's one of the biggest thing. I experienced that as well. And then once you grow up a bit, you realize that that's actually what makes you unique.
Absolutely.
And if you learn to embrace it, then it kind of becomes the catalyst to the path of where you're going to.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It really, you do get to that point where it changes completely, where you realize that it doesn't necessarily matter how anyone else is living. And it doesn't change. You don't have to fit in any kind of box. You don't have to be, an extremely spiritual person in what I had in my mind of what that was at that point in time. And you don't have to necessarily fit into that box. And you also don't have to completely fit into anyone else's box of what might be normal or, fit into society's standards.
It's so interesting what you just mentioned, that there's also many ways that you can be spiritual. And everybody has the opportunity to interpret spirituality in their own way and take the practices that they relate to and feel that really do connect them to something bigger, something spiritual, and maybe leave the ones that don't. What are the spiritual practices that you relate to the most?
Well, I think mine are maybe also a little bit outside of how a lot of people would connect to their inner conscious and what they view to be spirituality, which is why for a very long time, I almost felt like I wasn't spiritual enough, because it wasn't just by, chanting or, necessarily yoga even, or anything like that. For me, I found it very much from being in nature. That's very, very important to me, when I realized, the more time I spent in nature, the more connected I felt to that bigger, consciousness. And I felt like I was understanding more about what that meant to me, and what, my purpose was, or what I felt connected me most to that. So definitely being in nature. And I found out a lot in journaling and also chanting my mantra. I feel like not as much. I do chant kirtan, but I feel most connected to that when I'm just sitting outside in the morning, just on my porch with my cat, and just chanting my mantra with my, prayer beads. And that's when I feel the most calm. That, or when I'm just outside going for a walk or a hike in nature, and especially where I live, it's so easy to just completely be disconnected from everything else except for just the source, and just I can feel like then Mother Nature is just speaking to me, and that's when I feel the most spiritual, I think.
That's beautiful. Is there a specific mantra that you use?
Yes, but it was given to me by our guru, and you're not supposed to share it usually. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't typically talk about what it is, but I do feel like that I, especially in the past year, have found so much peace in chanting that. Especially when I find myself getting anxious, I just immediately start doing that until I am able to calm myself down. And it has been so beneficial once I realized that I can be incorporating that instead of just, because for so long I was like, all right, I wake up and I do this, and then I would kind of forget about it and go about my day. But now that I've started incorporating it throughout the day when I feel like I actually need it, that's what I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. It's bringing me back to the present moment. It's a form of meditation that's a lot easier for me than just completely sitting in silence, just sitting there and chanting and counting. I feel that's when I'm like, okay, I can completely disconnect and stop thinking for a moment.
Beautiful. So you're finding your own way to connect to meditation, spirituality. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
So you grew up around the festival, started dropping into classes. When was the time that you decided that you want to join the festival?
Yeah, this might surprise people, but I actually started originally. So in Joshua Tree, we have another festival that goes on around a similar time. And when I was around probably 15 or 16, I started volunteering at that festival. Just for fun. I was like, I didn't really necessarily even stay longer than my volunteer shifts. I would just go volunteer and come home. But I just wanted to feel like I was a part of it. And I love helping, and I loved working very early on. I was like, oh, just put me to work. Like, I want to do whatever I can to help. And at that point, I hadn't even started working for Bhakti Fest yet. I had just, I had been around every year, but I hadn't even really considered it. But I think then around that age period, I started kind of, joining little, like, smaller jobs in the festival, like in our merch booth. I would help, with the sales and ordering stuff, and on site, whatever they would need help with, like the info booth, or they would just kind of throw me in, like, oh, she can handle one of these little areas. And then that kind of progressed until I was 18. Then I started kind of taking on some of the, like, more roles in the festival, and like, oh, I'll handle this department, or, these smaller departments. And that's kind of how it started. And that at the same time, I had started working at these other festivals as well in more other roles. And I think that then I kind of was like, oh, I really have a passion for events and just helping organize and doing all of these different things. That then I was like, oh, this might be my thing.
So you started really getting on the ground and seeing how things work, and then started going up in the view of the management of the things.
Exactly. It was kind of like, all right, she can tackle some of these departments where if she messes up, it won't be a big deal. And then it was like, all right, maybe she's responsible enough to take on more, some of the things. Registration was kind of, that's like when, the box office, when you get there, that was the department where that was my first, like, oh, this is a big department and I'll take it on, because our registration manager she was away on maternity leave, so we needed someone else to do it. I was like, I think I can handle that. And that was kind of the first department that I took on, where I was like, all right. But at that point, I had already gotten my hands in some of the other areas enough to know how a lot of them worked, which I think really benefited me in the long run. Yeah.
Wow. So you really got to see it from the ground.
Definitely.
That's beautiful. So that takes me kind of to the next question about the intention for the festival in terms of, I guess, the bigger view of the founders and people who are running it. What is the motivation behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of actually, I believe it was the first Kirtan festival in America.
Wow.
So it was kind of that was not really an audience that had been reached necessarily. I'm not saying that, of course there was musicians that were already practicing, but on this, in this area, it was kind of a new thing. Like, it was introducing it to a lot of people on the West Coast and getting them, showing them, because obviously yoga has been kind of westernized and adopted on into America. That's a lot of the spirituality has kind of been lost along the way. So I think it was kind of showing people how to incorporate those things and really take from the root of where it came from and how to incorporate that into your practice and what it means to practice, spirituality in general. We have so many workshops and classes and just kirtan where people can come and experience it for the first time and really be like, wow, this is a piece of me that I've been missing this whole time. Like, this is why I have, I felt like I've been missing something.
That's what I felt when I found the spiritual world, because it was really like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
That's so, I relate to that so much.
Yeah, definitely.
So growing up, I would say it was very communally oriented, right?
Absolutely.
With this focus around creating a community, around something that's very beautiful in my perception. How has that changed your view of abundance and the importance of sharing our lives, our resources with other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so interesting to look back on, because for so long, every year for the festivals, twice a year, we would my father's home where I now live, it would be this kind of communal place for the month prior to the festival and usually the month after the festival. And we would typically have about 30 people that would just be at the house, like camping in the backyard, like living in all, the spare rooms, on the couch, like just all over the place. On the porch. We would have a whole kind of communal kitchen set up outside with a fridge and a sink. Like, he built like another bathroom outside so that it could kind of be this communal area where people could come, and a lot of them would volunteer and just help us set up for the festival and break down afterwards. And then in the evenings every night, people would chant, and it was really this amazing family atmosphere that I realized how much that was important to me, because I don't think I had realized. Obviously, I had grown up with a lot of that community, but being there and having, especially once I had moved in there and I was like, this is my home. And I felt a little bit of resistance at first when I was living there full time and people would come for the festival and I'd be like, oh, but then I realized like how important it was for me that they were there. And I would kind of feel almost this emptiness after everyone would leave. I'm like, oh, I want, it's like my family. Like, even though a lot of the times they would be mostly different people every time. It just felt like we had developed this amazing community and family that was like, oh, we're all striving towards this one goal of creating this amazing experience for everyone. And that became really special to me. That's kind of followed me through my journey of like, oh, this is really my purpose of doing this.
It's amazing how it started as this mini small community was the grassroots of creating this big event. And I think it's also very beautiful how you were able to, your group were able to create a very moving and spiritual event that felt authentic. I haven't been, but I asked around a little bit here. Our co-founder, Craig, had a booth there for a few years and said beautiful things about the festival. And I just was wondering, how are you able to keep this core of authenticity and still have a very moving spiritual experience while having such a big crowd?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was at times a little bit, it wasn't difficult. I think naturally the authenticity, it came from the fact that we had a genuine reason behind it. It was always the same goal. It was never about anything other than we need to create this experience for people to have, because we know how much it means to people. We just, for so many years, we would hear stories of how much it meant for people to be there and how it's impacted them on their spiritual journeys, and just having that connection and community and seeing each other twice a year, every year, like people just, it meant so much to them. So having that reason behind it, I think always kept us grounded, even though, it was a big task and we had to have a big team of people. The whole team, really everyone that we brought on, all shared that same drive and that same goal to create this experience for everyone. And everyone was really, was like really heart-centered and had the same focus. So I think that helped a lot in creating that atmosphere. So that if we had that atmosphere as a team, that translated to having that atmosphere at the festival.
Yeah. Hey, I'm quickly interrupting the episode to extend an invitation. If you are interested in deepening into any of the subjects we talk about on the podcast, we offer many different experiences on our beautiful grounds here in Baja, Mexico. From 9-day modules such as sound healing and yoga nidra to breath and meditation, as well as 200 or 300-hour yoga teacher trainings and many different shorter retreats. Check out our website, Yandara.com, to see all the information about the different experiences. Let's get back to the episode. Then COVID hit, and you co-founded a new venture with your father, Sridar Silberfein, which is the Luna Soul Retreats.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit how that idea came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of 2020, we kind of took a step back. 2019 for the festival had been a bit of a chaotic year for us. So it almost came as somewhat of a welcome break where it was like, okay, we need to take a step back anyway and reevaluate what's next for us. And at the time, it was such a difficult year for everyone, but it really forced us to slow down so much and be like, okay, what is it that we're looking for? What are the next steps forward? What can we create for people that is not, we need something fresh. We need something new. And so 2020 kind of came and went and we didn't do anything. And then 2021 came and Shri approached me with this idea. He had just found Yandara and he said, what if we do a mini Bhakti Fest? And at first I was a little hesitant. I was like, what does that mean? I had kind of taken on the real like logistic and business role of things. So I was like, that's where my brain would go to immediately. Like, oh, what are the logistics? Like, does it make sense for us to do that? But the more he explained it to me about, what that would look like for us and what if we did, this retreat, that's kind of how it had developed into this idea of, it could be a retreat. He had many years ago done so many retreats with Ram Dass and so many other people that, he kind of was familiar with that space. And it was something prior to COVID that I had this dream of doing these short, small Bhakti Fest events. I didn't know at the time what that looked like, but I knew I wanted to do something like that where it kind of was a little bit more intimate, less people, maybe possibly a little bit longer. So this was kind of like, maybe this is what that's going to look like. And that created Luna Soul. We did our first retreat last August. And it was so magical that it was like, this is it. This is what we were looking for.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful that in this new evolution, you decided to take more of a leadership role, right?
Yeah, I had kind of been taking on that position the past few years at Bhakti Fest prior to 2020. I had already kind of started leading the charge, I guess, of being maybe the main person of contact and directing everything. So at that point, it was kind of, up to me what was going to happen next. He was planning on taking a step back and I was just going to take over things from there. But at the time, the festival we weren't sure if that's what that looked like for us. So with the retreats, it was kind of only natural, like, he's usually the dreamer and I'm the one that kind of follows through and makes it happen. And that's kind of how we are dynamic.
The perfect combination.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you now are an entrepreneur. What would you say, which kind of advice would you give for people who want to become entrepreneurs, either in the spiritual world or in the community building world?
Yeah, I think a really important thing that a lot of people forget is that I think we tend to place the most limitations on ourselves, especially as an entrepreneur. You find yourself, it can be really difficult. It can be challenging and it's not always the clearest path. But I think once you realize that you are the only one placing those limitations on yourself and preventing yourself from moving forward, then it opens this clear path for you. You can kind of understand, like, it's all a learning curve. There are no necessarily right or wrong ways to learn things. And there's no sense in, I feel like we get so caught up in kind of telling ourselves, oh, I'm not old enough or smart enough or spiritual enough, or just doubting ourselves and all it is that we can create and manifest into our own lives. And we get so caught up in that we're just creating that resistance. We're creating that limit on ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the case. We can kind of, once we establish, we can do anything we set our minds to, which might sound a little cheesy, but we can really conquer anything.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Sometimes we decide on ourselves or even take from other people what we can or cannot do. Mm-hmm. And that really creates a limitation. And I love that you mentioned that it's really the limitation that we put on ourselves. And how did you navigate that with your own experience? Yeah,
I really learned from people older than me that I found to be inspiring in that, in an entrepreneurial role. I have a lot of great mentors and people that I kind of look up to, and I'm like, okay, I can learn from these people. And then I realized if I looked back on all of the times that I had doubted myself and believed that I couldn't do something, that's never, at the end of the day, I always could do them. I always got through that period of time and something came from it. Whether or not it went as exactly as I planned, I always had learned something from it and gained some kind of, new strength, or I had just grown as a person and as a business person. And I think I really opened myself up to that learning and just accepting that not everything is always going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah. And if we don't try, we will never find out.
Exactly.
Very true. And what was something that you learned to appreciate about yourself through this process?
My ability to really just grow and change with change, just to adapt to whatever comes to me and, just go with the flow, let it carry me essentially, and not be so against the change. Because obviously, 2020 brought us so much change, and that can be a really scary thing for a lot of people. And it was a really scary thing for me because I didn't know what the future was going to look like and how that looked for our business. And I really questioned myself for a long time if that was what I wanted. And now being able to look back and see how fulfilled I have been doing this, I am realizing, okay, that, and very much like that, I have to thank for my ability to change, like my ability to adapt to the ever-going change.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest things that came from this last period, that, everything just changed. Mm-hmm. So many businesses couldn't continue the way that they used to. And it was just the situation, right? There was no option around it. And either you adapted and moved forward and became creative and thought of something new, or I guess, you just stayed back. And I see it really as a catalyst to push our society forward, to create new things, to not settle in our comfort zone, but go out of our comfort zone and challenge ourselves and really become more adaptable to everything that's happening around us.
Exactly. It really forced a lot of us into a very uncomfortable position that is change, because a lot of us are so resistant to that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's scary. The unknown is scary. We like to be comfortable. So being able to adapt to that and grow and learn from it is very powerful for everyone, I think.
It's so funny because a lot of times we're scared of change, but we know that we don't want to stay the way that we are.
Exactly. We want something else, but we are still resistant to the change that's going to get us to whatever it is that we want.
How did you navigate that in terms of your inner world and your inner dialogue?
Yeah, I kind of accepted exactly that. I looked at what is it that I want? I did a lot of vision boarding and writing. I like to just kind of write just in simple words, like what what does this look like? What is my goal with my intention for what I'm doing here? What is the feeling that I want to come out of it? And what's driving me? What's making me want to do this? And then that kind of helps propel me through that fear. And I think also another thing that Krishna Das mentioned in his satsang the other day was, is a really good way of addressing those kind of negative feelings, which to me, that's the feeling of resistance. And that's just kind of observing the feeling as it comes into your body and giving it personifying it and being like, hello, welcome to this feeling, letting it settle in your body and just observing it be there. You don't have to feel you shouldn't, you don't want to feel anger towards it being there. Because oftentimes you can be like, oh, I'm so frustrated that I am so resistant to this change, or I'm so afraid. And then it becomes bigger. Exactly. You allow it to grow. You just feed it. If you just observe it and you're like, hello, like, welcome. It's okay that you're here. And then often it'll just move on. It'll just flow right past you. And then you can just move on with your day, because those feelings are always going to come and go, but we just can't let them control us.
Yeah. And what would you say is your most memorable moment from the festivals, the retreats?
Well, there's been a lot of memorable moments, definitely, especially at the festivals. That was just one big memorable moment. Everything was just constantly like, wow, there's a lot going on. But with the retreats, it's very much been, just the opportunity to meet all of these people that have come here and the first retreat we had, being able to, after being, isolated for so long, especially just seeing these people's smiling faces as they arrived and as they loosened up over the week, I just remember that feeling of joy and love that I was getting from seeing how happy everyone else was, and the connection that they were making with their community and the love that was being filled in the space. Like it made such a memorable impact on me. I remember I went home and immediately called my mom. She's my best friend. And I just told her how fulfilled I felt and how grateful I was to have been there. And I had never really felt that strong of that feeling in a work setting before. I had been like, that was definitely memorable for me.
Mm-hmm. For me personally, I can say that being in a place like this is so fulfilling and enriching in terms of being around people who are like-minded, that are interested in things that I'm also interested in, people who love going deep and speaking about the bigger questions in life. And it's so reassuring to have this community and find it in different places.
Absolutely. Definitely. And the more I think that you experience that and you open yourself up to that, the more you're able to find that in your more day-to-day life. Yeah.
It's really true, because when you're experiencing it, you become resonant with the frequency of it. And then when you go home, you attract that frequency into your moments.
Exactly.
So we arrived at our closing curiosity questions that we do for every end of interviews. We'll start with, what is something that you've changed your mind about?
I have definitely been working on allowing myself to be more open to other perspectives, especially. I'm definitely a stubborn person, and I tend to think that, if I'm not handling something, then it's not going to be done correctly. And it's a big control thing for me. I really, want to be taking care of everything and make sure everything's done perfectly. So something that I've changed my mind about is really allowing myself to open that up and trust the people that are on my team, especially in this environment, and just be like, okay, I fully trust that they can handle whatever they were assigned to do, and that they're going to do it just as well, if not better, than I would have done it.
What is something that you didn't think you can do and you did?
After 2019, since it was such kind of a difficult year for us, it kind of put I started to question my ability in general as a leader, as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur. I questioned myself that if I could continue on in the same field and the same path that I was on, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to handle that. I kind of questioned my abilities. And now, when we started talking about the retreats, that kind of came into play, because I was like, well, am I going to be able to do that? I don't know anything about the retreat space. It's a kind of whole different beast in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And since we've been doing them, I've kind of realized how naturally I've been able to fall into that role and how comfortable I am in it, and being like, oh, wow, I'm actually able to handle this with a lot more ease than I thought I would be able to.
Mm-hmm. So amazing how so many times we have this challenge in front of us and it seems impossible. And then after we do it, we're like, I can't believe I was so scared about it, or that I thought of not doing it.
Exactly. That's typically when you get the best experience out of moments like that.
Definitely. And it's the moments of growth.
Mm-hmm.
I always look at if something is really scary for me or really challenging, I'm like, that's where I need to go.
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely where the most growth happens. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. What gives you hope?
I think that I find hope in a lot of different places. I think that hope to me really goes hand in hand with faith and trust, and just the ability to trust kind of the unknown. And I think that's where hope really most comes into play, right? Because we allow fear to be so prominent in our lives of what, the future holds. And typically, if we just allow ourselves to be guided by trust and by faith that everything will work out and, go, better than we want it, or it might go different than we might want it. But either way, it will work out. That's typically what happens. It's like we convince ourselves it's all about this energy of what we're creating, and especially when I'm kind of experiencing, I find so much of my spirituality in nature as I'm kind of out in nature, and I just allow myself to be fully present and notice these tiny little details around me that they're so beautiful. I just think like, wow, this is just one big art piece that we're in right now. And I think that it shows me how beautiful things can be. And that kind of can bring me back to center and like, okay, like I have hope that everything will be just this beautiful, because that's, how everything was created.
Yeah, being in nature really takes us out of this separateness and reminds us that we're part of this whole big organism that's living and breathing together.
Exactly, the oneness. Absolutely.
Yeah. Next question is, how do you define happy?
I think I feel the most happiness or joy. Like what I've just been talking about this whole time with nature, especially, that's a big thing that I come back to, because that is part of when I feel the most joyful. It's especially in the smallest moments, which is something I've realized semi-recently. We put so much pressure on having goals or something that we need to obtain in order to be happy. And that's really not the case when we stay still and are in the present moment and realize that you can find so much happiness and so much joy in the smallest little moments. Just as I try to bring that up a lot with people I love and kind of bring the attention to those moments. I had a conversation with some friends recently where I asked what's the moment that you remember feeling the most joyful? And when I think about that, it's the smallest moments for me. It's just sitting on my porch in the morning, chanting my mantra and hanging out with my cat, or reading a book, and the weather's beautiful and my little hummingbird comes to visit, or, other creatures. I have a bobcat that comes to visit and sits on my porch with me sometimes. So
A bobcat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right after I started, I had stopped chanting my mantra for a while, kind of when I had gone through this period in 2020. And so what a family friend told me, she was like, you need to start chanting your mantra again. I think it's going to get you out of this space. And I was like, okay, I started doing it. And then the second day I was sitting on my porch chanting my mantra, and then over the fence came this little bobcat, and he just hopped over, walked across my porch a few feet away from me, and then proceeded to just hang out with me the rest of the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, just to sat. Right there. He didn't mind that I was there at all. He would just look at me and then kind of walk around, checked out the patio. He totally didn't care I was there at all. And then every week for months, he would come back and visit and just sit on the porch for hours and just
my goodness.
It was so sweet. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Did you name him?
Yeah, I named him Tiberius, or Mr. Tibbs for short, which came from a friend of mine who I met at Bhakti Fest, actually a very dear friend of mine. But he's always has the best names for things. So I always consult him when I have to name something.
Oh, yeah. That's a good friend to have.
Yeah, definitely. You got to have someone that has that creative sense.
Yeah. That's a city in Israel.
That's amazing. It's such a beautiful name. I would love to visit there someday.
It's beautiful. It's right on the water in the north of Israel.
And it's kind of, I guess it's not random at all, but it felt at the time like such a random name. But I was like, yeah, it sounds so majestic and it just fit him so perfectly. Yeah, wow. Tiberius the bobcat.
Does he still come over?
He hasn't been a little while. He came a couple months ago. I think it's a little cold out there for him right now. I think he's hiding away, but he came a few months ago and he got a little chubby. And I was like, oh, hi. I walked out because sometimes I would walk out. He would either be on my porch or on the other side of my house. I would go out to get in my car and he would either be just lying under my car or just somewhere in like a tree, somewhere lying under the shade.
Oh my goodness. Sweet. That's incredible.
That's my little buddy.
I think that's beautiful that you said that it's really about the small moments. We forget about that sometimes. We have these big goals and pursuits and we miss the small moments, the beautiful flower right next to us or that smile from that person or across the room or just moments of connection.
Yeah, exactly. Small moments of connection, I think, is you can find that so easily. You just have one little conversation. You're like, wow, I just had such a moment with them. And you have to then be aware that happened and to value that. Because sometimes we can just move right past it and go on with our day. But that can really be such a source of joy and happiness.
And for our final question, what are you curious about right now?
I'm curious. I think since we started the retreats, it's really, for so long, obviously we were so isolated and we weren't meeting new people. And I forgot that feeling, the feeling of meeting new people and that curiosity to know about them and their lives and, the vivid and complex things that happen within their lives. Because we just get so caught up, at least I got so caught up just in my own bubble in my house with no one else. And it just for so long had kind of trained me to just forget what that was like, essentially. I hadn't traveled in so long. I hadn't worked in so long. So when I started doing that again, I was like, wow, I missed this. I missed the curiosity of wanting to know about other people and, having those experiences and meeting these new amazing people because people have so many incredible stories to share.
Yeah, we're definitely doing a lot of that around here.
Definitely. Absolutely. This is a good place to be for that.
And the atmosphere that has been created in the last few days, I have to give you the credit for it because it's been really beautiful. And I see everybody walking around with smiles and making new friends and honestly just relaxed. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. It really warms my heart when I, even if I'm just like being quiet and kind of eavesdropping on people's conversations, I find it so cute and endearing. The moments that people are sharing here, it feels like everyone becomes one big family and it's really special. Earlier, I heard someone apologizing for someone else because he had they were both lying, listening to the music, and then one of them started drumming with his fingers, and I guess it kind of gave the other one a fright. And then, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I gave you a fright when I was drumming." And I was just like, it was so cute. I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." People just have such sweet moments with each other here. It's really special.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I think, we have a couple more retreats coming up this year in June and November. So anyone that hasn't heard of the retreats, I would love for them to check it out and see if they would be interested in joining us. It's such a wonderful experience. And, we're always looking to find new people that want to come join us. You can find us at Bhakti Fest on Instagram, Facebook, and our website is bhaktifest.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter to know about the retreats beforehand. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. Bella, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, after this time to nurture your mind and your spirit, we invite you to take a moment to consider others. A kind wish might come to mind. Know that what we learn becomes more valuable when we apply it and share it with others. So share this episode on Instagram stories, tag Yandara and I, or share with a loved one so that more people can benefit from it. Our hope is that the search will lead you home, to who you already are, to what was always there. We'll be back next week with more inspiration, honest conversation, and insight into the energetic world around us. Thank you for listening and watching.